Let me start with a strange consideration. Most artists believe that the way to become a great artist is to maximize everything: better anatomy, better perspective, better values, better detail or more detail, better rendering, better form, everything. And if you look at how artists learn online, it almost feels like everyone agreed on the same battle plan: push every skill to the max. Now, none of this is wrong. These things matter. They are the basics in drawing. That's why we call them fundamentals. But there is a hidden problem inside of this idea. If every artist is trying to improve the exact same thing, well, then every artist is also competing for the exact same place. It's like millions of swimmers all jumping in the same pool, and then suddenly everything gets really crowded. This is exactly what you see on ArtStation. Now, a few years ago, I read a book called Blue Ocean Strategy. It's actually a business book, not an art book, but the idea inside it really changed how I think about art and artists. The book talks about something called a value curve. Now, don't worry, it sounds complicated, but the idea inside of it is actually very, very simple. If you imagine every company in an industry that they're trying to improve the same thing, right? Airlines are trying to improve flights, making them more comfortable. Hotels try to add luxury. Restaurants try to make their food and their service better, naturally. So everyone is trying to improve the same set of things, which means everyone is competing in the exact same space. The authors of the book call that a red ocean, an ocean full of competitors. But sometimes a company does something very interesting. Instead of trying to beat everyone at the same game, they just change the game. They lower some things that everyone else cares about, all of those other companies care about, and they raise the standard for something else completely. And then suddenly they're not really competing in the same way anymore. And this is what the author calls a blue ocean. It's a place with far less competition. Now, here is where this idea becomes really interesting for artists. Because once you start looking at famous artists through this lens, you notice something surprising. The artists who stand out the most are not the ones trying to maximize everything. Very often, actually, they do the opposite. They ignore certain things on purpose, and instead, they kind of push for something else much further. Let me show you what I mean. Take the comic artist Mike Mignola, the creator of Hellboy. If you compare his drawings to other comic artists, something really jumps out immediately. His drawings are actually quite simple. They're not very anatomical. The anatomy is actually not that good. The rendering is very minimal. There isn't a lot of detail going on at all. But he focuses on something else entirely. He focuses on shapes. The shapes are amazing. Shadows are awesome. Huge areas of black, very clear compositions. His pages really feel like graphic design. And because of that, you recognize a Mignola drawing instantly. And that is cool. Not because he tried to maximize everything, but because he chose what not to focus on. You see, the same thing with Studio Ghibli. If you compare Ghibli films to many, let's say, Hollywood animated movies, the difference is very strange. Hollywood tries to really keep everything very exciting all the time, fast-paced, really Hollywoody, big action scenes, constant movement. But if you look at Ghibli, often they slow everything down. A character might just sit there quietly, just watching in the rain or like looking out of a window, just like that. Nothing dramatic, nothing exciting. But yet those moments feel incredibly powerful and they add to the style of Ghibli. Because Ghibli focuses on something many studios really ignore, which is atmosphere, feeling, the sense that you are in a world that is alive in and of itself. Again, they didn't maximize everything. They simply chose a different value curve. Another great example is the artist Mobius. Most science fiction art is usually very dense, especially back then. Lots of details, lots of rendering, complex machinery, but Mobius often did the opposite. Just clean lines. Very little shading, not too much black. Open spaces, a lot of room to breathe. And he added a lot of imagination. That's what he, pumped up really hard. Strange world, really weird buildings, very dreamlike landscapes. And that's what made his style really inviting. He changed, again, he changed the value curve. And you can see this even in something very simple like Adventure Time. If you look at the characters, the anatomy is it's almost laughable, all right? You have like big round heads, tiny bodies, of course optimized for animation. It's all extremely simple shapes, but the characters are still filled with personality. They're charming, they're expressive, and that is what the show actually focuses on. So again, they reduced something at the cost of maximizing something else. So something else could really stand out. And this leads to a very important idea for artists. The artists who stand out the most are not trying to maximize every skill at once. They're making deliberate choices. They're deciding what matters most, and they're willing to forego or simplify other things to make room for that. In other words, their style is not what they're adding, it's actually what they're removing or choosing not to emphasize. And when you simplify things like anatomy, you can exaggerate shapes, or when you simplify rendering, you can explore imagination or color more. When you flatten lighting and rendering, you can create stronger graphic design. So every choice that you make adds to your artistic value curve. Now, this does not mean fundamentals don't matter, you lazy bums. They absolutely do. You still need to learn anatomy. You still need to understand perspective and form at Artwod. Those skills are tools, but the tools are not the same as creating an artistic identity. If every artist uses the exact same tools in the exact same way, the results start to look very similar. ArtStation. And that's when the ocean becomes crowded. And that's not what we want. The more interesting question for an artist is this: what do I want my art to emphasize? What do I want people to feel when they see it? And what am I willing to sacrifice or simplify to make that happen? Because the artists we admire most didn't really become famous by doing everything perfectly. They became famous because they chose what mattered most to them. And they built their art around that. They centered everything around that. So they really changed the value curve for themselves. And by doing that, they created their own blue ocean. And interestingly, this is also exactly the way I built Artwod. When I looked at most online platforms, I noticed the same thing. Almost every platform was trying to maximize the exact same thing. More courses, more lessons, more theory, longer explanations, right? Complex things. And while that might work for some people, I noticed I wanted to do something else. Most artists don't struggle because there's not enough information. There's actually way too much information. They struggle because they're simply not drawing enough compared to what they're consuming. So the practice, the daily practice is what matters. So instead of maximizing content, we reduced it. Instead of endless lessons, we focused on daily practice. Instead of long lectures, we focused on small exercises. Instead of overwhelming theory, we focused on having you gain momentum. In other words, we changed the value curve. We lowered some things that most platforms actually emphasize, and we increased something that we believe matters a lot more: consistency. Because in the end, artists don't improve by watching more tutorials. They improve by drawing more. It's natural, right? And so that small shift that we made, it completely changed the focus and it changed the user experience at Artwod. So if you ever feel like there are too many artists online and too much competition, remember this: you don't have to beat everyone else at the same game. Don't swim in the red ocean. Sometimes the smartest things to do is often just simply play a different game. All right, as always, with that said, happy learning, happy drawing, and I'll see you in the next one.